Okay, good morning, everybody. So we are going to be the moderator of these discussions. So we were thinking how to make it very active, and we decided to be, in fact, provocative. So according to the presentation that we had, we thought about some questions in order to a bit provoke the audience, and I hope that also provoke it our panel. Although I think they already give some answers to our questions, but mine are, as an anthropologist, I'm a bit, look, I'm doing a bit the silly person, but I wonder how, with a name such as One Health, we can address this complexity of the world that we mentioned biologically and also culturally, and by that avoiding to also be a bit ethnocentric and therefore coming with approach that are top down and not really reflecting this, especially this diversity. So, yeah.
Okay. Actually, I'm really, really glad that you raised that question. That was one of my 50 slides. You'll see that reflected actually. And yes, it's true. There are various terms to essentially say the same thing. So we've got eco-health, we've got One Health, we've got One World, One Health, we've got planetary health now. And I mean, there does appear to be a little bit of a territorial battle. And I think what's really important, certainly from a policy perspective, is not to show how these fields have had different origins, how eco-health has maybe originated was primarily driven by ecologists, or how One Health movement was primarily driven by veterinarians, or how the planetary health movement was primarily driven by the health sector. I think rather than showing these divides, we should be focusing on what really brings these fields together. And essentially, the core messages are really very much the same, and they very much coincide. And I do tend to agree. If you look at the State of Knowledge Review, and it's in either one of the slides, but certainly in some of our summaries, we decided to refer to everything as One Health in terms of integrative approaches throughout the course of the State of Knowledge Review, precisely to avoid this this linguistic battle or this linguistic territorial battle. But one of the things that we do emphasize, and one of the things that we don't necessarily see, and I'm sure I would love to hear your inputs on this actually, in the actual operationalization of One Health, is precisely that social dimension and that social component. We're not entirely sure, it isn't entirely evident how we do bring in the social dimension, but not only that, the different scales of governance. Because it really is one thing to say we're collaborating up here across experts, and as you were saying, this does lead very much to a top-down approach. But really, the people at the front lines of natural resource management are at the national level. And a lot of these interventions will demand large-scale behavior change. And behavioral change can't really be imposed from the top down. So it really is also about the co-production of knowledge. It's about bringing people in from the outset. So I think there are several points in there that make for an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from other people here as to whether they think the social and anthropological dimensions of One Health actually have any voice at all. Is there any channel that we're listening to people? you know, I guess what I'm thinking is that people are a bit pissed off, basically. I'm talking very generally about, you know, governance issues, you know, am I well, am I not well, am I wealthy, am I not wealthy? I mean, there's an enormous amount of narrative out there that,
Yes.
you know, it's, you know, people are reacting in a sense to these, but we don't have a mechanism to get that information into this higher policy level to really understand the dynamic and whether One Health is the right way to help those people to solve these problems. So who, you know, is anybody?
Yes, actually, I think it's really a key point. I'm an anthropologist myself, and I think that in the field of this One Health, planetary health, and the challenge that we have, it's really challenging, and it's not only about disciplinary approach, anthropology of health. That, from my understanding, that is not what is at stake. What is at stake is to be able to promote collective action. I mean, when you are let the anthropologist speak.
I was in an earthquake once in a room like this, and the room started shaking, and there was somebody speaking, and they wouldn't stop, and I was chairing, and I said, I think we should stop.
What do we do?
Go on.
Okay. So it's not about it's really about collective action, because when you want to hear the voice of the people, you think the people are tired, etc. But there is really some to change practice and to consider that we have a common good to manage together, which is healthy environment, actually. And it's how to promote healthy environment. Of course, by understanding all the ecological functions, emergence processes, etc., but also with new regulations from public policies, of course, but not only. It is really about how to articulate collective actions and policies. And I think for this, sociologists, anthropologists have a role to play. It's not about risk perception, etc. It's really about promoting collective action with local governance.
Shall we start by introducing ourselves? I'm John Farr, MMU and C4. What I'd like to say is that I've heard some very, very good speeches this morning. I particularly liked Richard's and Serge, because you actually come up with a series of very important points of what the priorities are in the whole issue of One Health. And I take from you both that there are much more issues to do with domesticated animals and wildlife. And I'm a wildlife biologist, I work on Ebola and stuff like that, so my emphasis will be wildlife, but I do like what we are saying, that it is really domestic animals that we should be looking at, maybe for Ebola and many other things like that. The other thing is that what you say, Serge, is that there is an enormous dysfunctional arrangement between policies and higher level politics and all that. There are some very clear messages in your speech, your talk, and Richard, that should be already, the food for thought that we're talking about. They should be digesting and regurgitating in the best possible manner, of course. And I don't see that being articulated anywhere. There are some very, very good points in both of yours, Christina, but in a different way. But from the science point of view, I think it's from the science point of view, I think these are incredibly important points that I hope that in these 2 days we can actually develop further. Nothing against the anthropologists, but all of this huggling and doing things from the bottom up can be done, but I think we need to concentrate on the science.
We need to concentrate on the science.
Hello, I'm Annelise. I'm a vet, but I'm working on One Health Eco Health in Europe and Middle East. I'm very surprised by one thing. we kind of never mention collaboration with the World Trade Organization, while it seems to me that most of the things are linked to trade. And the fact that market price doesn't show or doesn't reflect the social cost and the ecological cost of the product is, I think, the base of maybe 90% of our problem. Why don't we actually invite traders and big financial organizations to see how internationally we could solve that? Because that it will solve the international issue, but also governance on a national level. I just think that trade is the answer.
If I could just quickly comment on that, I think it's really, really important. So political economy, trade, all those, business, these are fundamental to getting the solution. But we have to get, in a sense, order within that community that's thinking about this. If we don't get order there, and you go to the World Trade Organization table, these business folk are going to say, forget it. And, you know, and that's a problem, actually, with a lot of conservation. I don't think they get it. I don't think conservationists get it, actually, as to what's going on. And so I think we really have to get our house in order.
Hello, I'm Maurice Gilbert. I'm a researcher in spatial epidemiology. I had two comments I wanted to make. The first one was we emphasized rightly the role of livestock, but I didn't find much of room for agriculture in the State of Knowledge document.
Okay.
In terms of content. Well, really, I mean, institutionally, yeah. Not institutionally in terms of content and in terms of IDs. I was a bit honestly deceived by that aspect. I found it was poorly represented, whereas other aspects were very, very well documented and quite strongly documented. I just don't want to, but I think that part was not very well developed. And the other aspect I think is that a very important aspect that to highlight is that the problems we're facing are socio-ecological by definition, and it's very clear from what we've seen here. And the second element is that from Serge's presentation, it's quite clear that the science base that links biodiversity to health has a lot to improve upon, and it's very weak. Now look at the research funding schemes, and here I'm talking to the last presentation. It's very dominated by biomedical research. It's in fact, as a researcher, extremely difficult to build and submit projects that address simultaneously socio-ecological and economic dimensions. And as long as it's not realized by the structural scheme of research, we're not going to find solutions. We're going to remain working in different angles. I will do my spatial epidemiological work. Some people are going to do the anthropological work, and some others are going to find vaccines but we won't solve the problems because we don't understand them well. And I think that's a key message to be done. And I think it's going to be through all the different talks here that all those things not only should be working in those kind of conferences, but should be structurally into the different funding schemes at national and international levels.
Yes, good morning. So the room goes all the way here as well. I'm Barbara Vinke from the Belgium Foreign Affairs. I work for the development agency there. And I also find all this very interesting, but our problem is how to mainstream all those beautiful ideas into actual policy. And so some people mentioned the SDGs and that this is an opportunity. For me, I don't really see the opportunity in the SDGs because even though it is supposed to be an integrated global approach, when it comes to health, again, all the indicators and all the targets don't really mention environment. And for us, it is very difficult. They're now writing, I'm from the environmental department, service, or whatever. The health service is rewriting the strategy. And they don't find really material to integrate the things they would like to integrate because it has to be really simple for us. It has to be, I see there is a lot of knowledge and the problem is to the vulgarization, I don't know if you say that in English, to make it accessible to,
Yes.
you know, like everybody and also to the political level. And sometimes it's easier to to raise awareness of simple people than of politicians. So that's my message. So I would like to leave here with some very practical tips. Thank you.
Last one, and then you continue. Is it okay?
Yes, thank you. Simon Ruig from University of Zurich and the Network for Evaluation of One Health. I actually noticed two things that when throughout the talks this morning is that when we talk health, we have a tendency of thinking about reactivity. So we're looking at a problem and then we get reactive. And I'm coming more from a systems perspective. And we actually differentiate events, patterns, and structures. So when I hear the EU strategy in One Health, it is focused on events occurring, analyzing the events, and responding. If we think about epidemiology, and I guess there's a few epidemiologists here, we're looking about patterns, so we're analyzing, so we understand how those events are actually occurring, but we still are reactive to it. So we want to be early responders. So we want to know the pattern before the events are happening. But we still fail to actually look at the structure that generates these occurrences or these patterns. And I think that's where it goes in line with the funding strategies. The funding strategies are entirely focused at discovering an event and responding to it. And they're not targeted at studying how infectious diseases in general, for example, are occurring at a certain spatial pattern, or how trade fluxes are affecting emergence of disease, or things like that. So there's no vessel in which you could actually apply for funding in that regard. And the second thing from a systemic perspective is, as Richard mentioned, how do we involve, or actually that was the first discussion, how do we involve the people? Well, I think we're in the right position here in a national science organization to ask the question, what are incentives for scientists to listen? And in fact, if you look at any funding, at any promotion, and at any political activity that is incentivizing scientists to progress in their career, it is all about emission of whatever, knowledge or unknowledge or policy or whatever, but actually nobody gets incentives to listen. So if we're talking about co-production, we're going to have to incentivize those that generate knowledge to actually listen. And that is, I think, a political issue that needs and a fundamental issue about human resource management at the academic level. And I think here we're in the right place to discuss that kind of interplay.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can have now some answers and reaction from our panel members to that series of question remarks and really provocative questions.
Okay, sure. I'll address some of the points very quickly, or those that I may remember were raised. Maybe starting with this last point, where you're talking about what are the incentives. What is the incentive for scientists to listen? And there was a speaker earlier who was saying, what we really need to focus on is the science and not necessarily the social side of things. And I think this is precisely, yes.
Not exactly different.
So, but this is precisely the challenge that we're facing. This is precisely why One Health isn't operationalized more than it is, because it's not just about the science. And it's not just about the policy. It's about bridging the science policy interface. So I feel like we're already polarizing here in the room, where it's like, oh, well, I'm a scientist, and oh, I'm a social scientist, so I feel a little bit marginalized, and, you know, let me see. No, it's not a question of, is one more important than the other? We really need to find a way to bring them together. So in the same way that we need to find incentives for scientists to listen, we really need to find incentives for policymakers to listen. And why is that important? Because that's the only way we will mobilize political will. And that is the only way we're going to get the legislative structures that some of you have mentioned in place, by mobilizing political will and by mobilizing public awareness. And to do that, we have to be able to communicate the scientific knowledge in a way that policymakers will understand. So I think it's also a question of translation of knowledge. It's a question of communication of knowledge that is really important. Another important point that was raised is the question of, you know, typically we're working in a very reactive way, and we're very much focused on a reactive approach. And I think this is particularly true of the public health sector. But in the environmental sector, if we just think about the precautionary principle, for example, it really is about looking at the upstream drivers. So this was something that I mentioned very briefly in the presentation, looking at the upstream drivers. That's very important. But what does that mean? That means, again, we are speaking different languages. We're talking about bringing different sectors together. At the same time, we all have different metrics. We all have different ways of approaching the problem. And we don't have a common language to address it. So I think One Health does provide a useful framework. However, it's not to say that there aren't inherent challenges in the approach. And I think that these do need to be tackled. There was also maybe just one very quick last point. Somebody had mentioned the SDGs. And they said that they see the SDGs as confusing and they don't see how they are in fact integrative. I do agree. I mean, interestingly, the SDGs were meant to address the unfinished agenda of the Millennium Development Goals. And the Millennium Development Goals, in large part, were not met precisely because of the siloed approach to achieving each of these, to achieving each of the targets. So if we are to achieve the SDGs, the only hope we actually have of achieving them is through more holistic and more integrative approaches. Now, how do we do that? It's true that each of the targets are somewhat compartmentalized, but it's up to us to then find the synergistic and antagonistic effects between and across SDG targets. And we can do that. Indicators are a very powerful tool through which we can do that. And those can be set at the national level and implemented based on national realities. So there is a way to do it. It's not easy, but I would argue necessary.
Okay, I don't want to spend too long. I felt that that far distance voice over there was one we should listen to, because it is this challenge of how do we get the hierarchy right, and this comes back to all these complex institutions and processes and so on. We are failing, let's face it, in many ways. But humans have always failed. We've learned more from our failures. We're not rewarded for that. We should be. I think if we were, we would probably have better policies. We'll accept the fact that we're not perfect. And the idea that the environment, it's just a difficult thing to deal with. So deal with the easy things. And, you know, with health and the power and hierarchy of health, it's easier to get a pill down somebody's throat, you know, than, you know, improve the conditions that person lives in. It's just easier. And some people makes money out of it, so it's good, you know. So I think we just, you know, it's this sort of issue. One of the things that I picked up recently, which I felt for the first time I heard that maybe there is some transformative activity, and that was the International Criminal Court, where now people can be taken to court for trashing the environment. I thought, my God, did I hear that correctly? So in addition to being a dictator that kills millions of people, somebody who destroys an environment that affects people, that's a criminal offense. Then I think we're making progress.
Difficult to speak after all this. Very, very. For me, I learned a lot for your questions. Maybe there is some way. There is a problem. Even I completely agree within the academics. Also, that's why also I resigned from all the scientific council, because it was one way that we did not discuss about science, but we discussed about political and small political affairs. But maybe there is something that we need to better work all together, which I understand, and in a way that the governance can be local or global, can be linked. There are several ways, and one way is to do like the climate change people, so doing scenarios. But doing scenarios. For the climate change, it was quite easy. It's only the greenhouse level. So they are it is also very interesting way, because in the climate change, you have the patterns and the statistics for the past, and you have the mechanisms for the future. And the mechanism is driven by the economists. We say that, okay, it's going like this, we'll have some kinds of tons of greenhouse gases, and this will affect by the climate change, blah, blah. In terms of One Health, and especially also for biodiversity, what are the targets? What we need? Even for the health, what are the targets? So I'm not sure that maybe the health, that's why also the well-being, there's many things also that the targets are sometimes we don't know, we don't speak about the same things, we don't have the same things. What is nice by doing scenarios, it helps maybe to put people all together to work together and to provide scenarios. And in this term, in scenarios, you can have different kind of outputs. But as I use the term scenarios and not modeling, in terms of scenarios, you need to have also a lot of interpretation, discussion, and it includes also the problem of the ethics of what you are doing in terms, because it's very easy to do maps and to do maps with very bad data, but the maps are already there, and which are also very wrong. So maybe supporting this way to do, okay, we need to build scenarios. And building scenarios, I think we agree, because we have to tackle the complexity. By the complex system, I think is really related what the Holling want to do at one time, and say that don't look at those, but look at some kinds of the patterns, and this will tell you that the system will crash.
Thank you very much. So it's already the end of our discussions. Thank you very much for all the contributions. Maybe we will pinpoint some main contribution or main messages from this contribution, from this discussion. Sorry. Maybe first, we can retain here that there is a true challenge for interdisciplinarity and for collaboration, intersectoral collaboration. It's one thing to understand that it is needed. It's another thing to make it happen. And one main message maybe is that the incentives for the researchers and for the scientific community are maybe now wrong and not there to really promote intersectorial and interdisciplinary work really on the field, with maybe interesting project, but where some specialists take one work package and other specialists another work package, but without a true integration of the results, a true integration of the methods and of the concepts. So Maybe you can have one more concluding remark, but then it's the end. No? Then thank you very much. Thank you.